Let's talk about Final Fantasy IV, which is basically my favorite thing ever. This game handled a lot of soul-wrenching subject matter, including grief and betrayal, forgiveness and atonement, compassion, self-sacrifice, resurrection and rebirth, and I think, especially, the idea of the false persona giving way to the authentic self. This game took the polarities of good versus evil to their furthest conclusions, and for some, even challenged our conceptions of moral identity. For me, it also instilled a sense of wonder, in many ways that no other game has quite replicated since. I realize it's an old game now, and there's no easy way of explaining its novelty to those who missed the peak years of Sakaguchi, Uematsu, Omono, Tokita, and Shibuya, but it's important to understand that when 4 came out, there was nothing like it. No other RPG had felt quite so lonely and yet hopeful, so sincere but also whimsical and silly, nor quite so spiritually and archetypally resonant. It felt like all the best parts of Star Wars, Star Trek, Tolkien, and Arthurian legend, and Japanese and American superhero stories had been combined into a single tale, and yet it was also so much itself. In this video, I'll be discussing the characters in depth, along with various psychological, philosophical, and spiritual interpretations, the crystals, Zeromus, the other worlds, and the recurring themes of magical teleology and self-transcendence. I'll be including some anachronisms from the DS and GBA remakes, as they add depth to the existing material, but nothing from the after years, as, aside from a couple of key moments, I feel it doesn't really add that much of substance to the original game. So, I'll start with the characters. I won't say that all of the characters in 4 are distinctly interesting. Some of them had complex personalities for 1991, and I personally enjoyed each of their stories. Yet, I'm fairly confident that a lot of the most interesting things about them were ideas I projected onto them, which is probably why I enjoy the older games so much, mind you. Ambiguity is where imagination grows roots, and 4 was beautifully ambiguous, remaining highly simplistic, while implying complex philosophy and piquant relational twists. And it's also important to acknowledge their significant influences on the games that followed, especially 6 and 9, which are my other two favorites in the series. While I can't claim the characters themselves are particularly deep, the game itself, and many of those who played it, received enormous depth from them nonetheless. In fact, I know several individuals personally whose lives were forever transformed by their stories. But it's not just about the characters. It's about what those stories awakened in us, structurally, and how this incites us to think, feel, and act. I'll begin with Cecil, not only because he's the protagonist, but also because he had some of the most interesting thematic developments of the series, even by today's standards. It starts out as a classic, fairly typical story of a tragic fallen hero, who, in the name of fealty, makes mistakes he'll regret for the rest of his life. It has many shades of Arthurian legend and various other hero myths throughout. He begins as something of a failure, but soon enough his quest is not simply one of atonement, but of ritual purification. Unlike a lot of modern heroes, Cecil doesn't only need to become better to prove his worth. His story isn't just about redemption. Cecil has to become symbolically perfect. Not unlike the Warrior of Light, he embodies a kind of archetypal Holy Knight figure. All of the protagonists in the series have something of that quality, to be sure, but Cecil is to them kind of what Captain Picard is to Kirk or Janeway, or Superman is to, say, Batman or Wonder Woman. Cecil's commitment to moral excellence for its own sake is extraordinary, and more importantly, it's somehow believable. Cecil disgraces himself, loses everything, accepts Mysidia's challenge, confronts his inner darkness, takes up the legendary sword, and even ultimately becomes king. And all of that feels right somehow, even inevitable. At least, that's how it felt and still feels for me. Whenever I play or think of the game, I get inspired to become something better. I feel a kind of passion to align myself properly. This kind of story inspires a certain moral discipline. It just feels good to be good. As with the likes of Aragorn, Captain Picard, or King Arthur. When I step into his shoes, I feel like I can breathe better, like the world makes sense, like there's something guiding me that can never let me down. And that's what the oldest hero myths were for. Something inside each of us wants to believe that there's a power out there, maybe even a part of ourselves that can't be corrupted. Cecil's entire trajectory explores the conflicts between power, destiny, and identity, and the game suggests by the end that there are hard limits on all three, that these things are inextricably linked, and that there is, ultimately, only one true power, one conjoined destiny, and one authentic divine self. It shows us that someone like Zemus or Golbez can make it pretty far, can even get as far as destroying nations and summoning the Giant of Babel. But when it comes down to it, only what is worthy of the crystal's light determines the ultimate fate of the universe. And that worthiness is directly proportional to self-acceptance, self-honesty, and self-command. But this is actually all I'm going to say about Cecil for now, because I'll actually be revisiting most of his major plot points, such as Mount Ordeals, Golbez, Rosa, and the Lunarians later in this video. I'll talk about each of the non-permanent party members very briefly, which include Edward, Yang, Tella, Fusoya, Sid, and Palom and Porum. Each of these guys brings something of their own to the table, though overall they're fairly one-note and mainly exist to advance the plot. One obvious connection between them is self-sacrifice. That's a theme which is by no means limited to the side characters. And the theme of sacrifice more broadly is ubiquitous in the game and indeed the franchise. But what these guys all have in common is a baffling desire to get themselves blown up. Or turned to stone, incapacitated, or, in the case of Fusoya, just being in the party at all is tantamount to getting himself killed. So I'll start with Tella, Palom and Porum, and Fusoya, whose presence within the party is alchemical, showing the trajectory, power, and fragility of magic, with the twins portraying its emergence, the sage portraying its decline, and the Lunarian portraying its completion. The twins, who embody nascent magic, can represent opposing voices, forces, drives, and functions both within the world's magic, but also within the human mind. Together they are id and superego, yang and yin, freedom and restraint, and self and other. I'll be delving further into the precise personalities and forms of dedication required to master white versus black magic in my sections for Rosa and Rydia. But for now, I'll say that a great sage like Tella, in his prime, must have achieved something extraordinary. The series subtly implies that mastery over multiple schools of magic is both rare and costly, and Tella's fading memory and frail body suggest that such total command over magic may not be possible indefinitely. Those most gifted with magic tend to be physically frail in the series, especially in the older games. And while this may be true of RPGs in general, 4 makes it apparent that, like the magic itself, and indeed the crystals, mages must be protected, because they must remain so entirely committed toward internal complexity at the expense of external embodiment. Though Tella, Porum, and Palom are in considerably better fighting form than they ought to be at their respective ages, they're portrayed as extremely vulnerable both mentally and physically. In Tella's case, despite decades of mastery, his grief over Anna propels him suddenly toward ruin, driving him to complete the final magic even if it kills him. And through his death, the game expresses the series' reiterative caution that to grasp too hungrily at higher powers is to invite one's own undoing. But also, The peril of great magic does not confine itself to the one who wields it. The twins' undoing similarly reminds us that such powers attract evil, and that evil destroys, corrupts, and murders us indiscriminately. No one is exempt. In spite of their youth and innocence, the twins have been claimed by the magic and entwined with its destiny. Simply put, had they not been highly skilled mages, and therefore strongly entangled with the magic's teleology, they'd never have been sent on such a mission in the first place. However, neither Tella's death nor the twins' transformation into stone are ultimately in vain, for the magic in this world both moves and is moved by a greater design, interlinking crystals, spells, souls, and even the fate of the universe within a single destiny. And this is a thing which is best expressed through the character of Fusoya, being the sole party member to witness magic's conception on Earth. He was present along with Kluya when the crystals were installed, and he recalls every spell while being many times the age of the others. But the primary difference here is that Fusoya is not human, where Tella has integrated something of the magical infrastructure into his consciousness. For our purposes, Fusoya is the magical infrastructure. He serves both the plot and the Lunarians as a kind of living lore archive, and along with the other Lunarians can represent a form of transpersonal magical consciousness which must remain eternally aspirational. The Lunarians are longer lived and by all seeming more intelligent, more sensitive, and overall less limited than humans, which, if taken a little bit less literally, doesn't necessarily represent mastery over material reality so much as a radically different relationship with the universe. And I'll be saying a lot more about that later, but for now I want to talk about Edward. Poor Edward. I don't think there's been a more unjustly hated character in the series. Just picture this for a moment. Within the span of an hour, there's been an airstrike on your home, the love of your life is murdered before your eyes, and many other people you know, possibly including your family, are killed. Then, right as your fiancée is giving her last words, her elderly father rushes in and beats you with his staff, accusing you of killing her. Right before a sinister dark knight and a cross green-haired child yell at you to stop crying while slapping you with a gauntlet.
It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing does.
You're not the only one who's grieving.
And then there's no path for you to take, really, other than to follow this Dark Knight. Bravely, I should add, because unlike him, you are not a warrior. You shouldn't have to be in the party. You are choosing to be there against your pacifist nature. Still, however, the fans somehow resent you for fleeing from danger, even when you're critically wounded. The fact of the matter is, many of us are a lot more like Edward than we might perhaps wish. Most people are not like Cecil, Kain, Rosa, Edge, or Rydia. Most of us are just sort of sitting on the bench, waiting, sometimes years, for any meaningful chance of being seen, of being loved, or even of being useful. Edward doesn't offer any magic. He's not particularly wise or insightful. He's certainly not strong, and unlike Kain, Yang, or Rydia, Edward comes back weaker after his departure. In fact, he spends most of the game in bed. The more fragile a character is, the more we seem to expect him to earn his keep, to put himself in peril or otherwise to get out of the way. Tella was polite enough to die for us in order to make way for Kain. The twins, resourceful enough to turn themselves to stone so that Cecil might live. But Edward's contribution? He just barely manages to drag himself out of bed, that he might offer us a song. And it's not a glorious song. In fact, it's a devastatingly simple and emotionally naked melody, yet it saves Cecil's life. It's a seriously underrated contribution, and I personally think it would not have been possible for any other being to play it so tenderly and so delicately as might have been required to disable the Dark Elf's magic. Where a mage hones insight and a warrior hones flesh, a musician must hone his emotion. He must preserve his tender heart and remain connected to his feelings at all times. This seems almost funny to some, but Cecil's world might have ended were it not for the gentle soul of Edward, and possibly countless other unsung heroes, whose simple acts of kindness have far-reaching consequences. And perhaps this is true for our world as well. Perhaps the least among us are out there healing the world right now without anyone ever knowing. I don't have a whole lot to say about Yang or Sid, except that they round out the cast fairly well and add dramatic tension to the plot by seeming to die repeatedly, by offering staunch support, and by acting as foils for Edge. And the game wouldn't feel the same without them. Sid in particular brings a lot of dad energy during critical moments following grief or betrayal, and while I think that's important for most of the characters, Edge and Cecil are in desperate need of father figures. In sharp contrast to the twins Tella, Fusoya, and even Sid, who is of course an engineer and must, despite his demeanor, contain universes of unspoken complexity within himself, Yang is defined almost entirely by physicality. So much so that his own wife recommends waking him with a frying pan. He's a warrior monk in every conceivable way. He's quiet, he's wholly truthful and wholly objective, entirely humble, and entirely committed to bodily excellence. Yet, it's precisely this composure that makes his story unsettling. His story reinforces the game's motif that even the most composed and disciplined of individuals are not immune to manipulation. Yang meditates daily, he trains relentlessly, he witnesses the brutalization of his homeland at the hands of Baron, and still, Baron finds a way into his mind, capturing him when he is injured and confused. In contrast to Kain, whose wounded pride and unmet longing make him vulnerable, Yang's lack of self-directed desire makes him easier to redirect. The game suggests that within each of us, there must be a blind spot somewhere. No one is invulnerable. But also, while each of us can be trapped, deceived, or harmed repeatedly, our greatest strengths coincide with our greatest shortcomings. So, for instance, while Cecil's loyalty was temporarily abused by Golbez, his empathy and pathos, related traits, were able to awaken his sense of individuality. By the same token, while Yang's militant instincts were co-opted, a trait invaluable to someone like Golbez, it was humility that ultimately restored him. There again, an adjacent virtue not easily manipulated by malice. And of course, having a support system is invaluable. At first glance, Rosa might seem to be a fairly simple, maybe overly idealized character. Someone who is good, almost to the point of being boring. She's our basic damsel in distress archetype, or even someone who simply exists to support the other characters. But I'm here to stand up for my girl Rosa, because if we actually make the effort to understand what it means, and especially what it takes to be someone like Rosa, we discover she's anything but basic. Rosa sits comfortably between the lineages of two frequently overlapping archetypes in the series. She's halfway towards what I once dubbed the Noble Rose archetype, seen later in characters like Celeste, Beatrix, or Lightning, and halfway similar to its closest sibling, the Magical Princess archetype, especially those such as Lunafreya, Rinoa, and Yuna in Rosa's case. Rosa is part Shield Maiden and part Holy Priestess, bearing the responsibilities, devotions, and self-denial endemic of both. But to understand what this means, let's first consider what it means to be a white mage in a world like Final Fantasy IV, specifically a mage on Rosa's level, and what kind of childhood she might have had to produce that result. I think we're actually shown a glimpse of this in the characters of Palom and Porom, whose dynamic suggests something of a dichotomy of temperament between destructive and restorative magic specialists. The stat system tells us that where black magic is enhanced by higher intelligence, sometimes referred to as will, which presumably engenders complex understanding of systems, lore, or perhaps even some form of dynamic calculation, which forces the universe into compliance. White magic is enhanced by the wisdom, sometimes also referred to as the spirit stat, which could be attributed to an innate felt understanding of divinity itself, or to depth of character, or even a resonance with higher powers, which appeals directly, perhaps tenderly, to the universe. We see one darkly precocious, impatient sibling, a rebellious trickster who's a little too clever for his own good. And then we see his lighter twin, who is wise beyond her years, whose disposition is permanently serious, who submits to authority enthusiastically and yet never to the wrong authority. Where intelligence provides one with creativity, ready competence, and razor-sharp logic, wisdom tends to soften one as a rule, to zoom out and look at the wider picture, even to surrender to it. Palom and Rydia are both hot-headed prodigies, hot-headed precisely because they're so clever as to be impatient. Porum and Rosa, meanwhile, are paragons of graceful acceptance. We see this same dynamic contrasted within our subclass mages, Edge and Cecil, where one is impatient, nimble, sneaky, and full of too many ideas, whereas the other is gentle, humble, ready to serve, and deeply sincere. Between intelligence and wisdom, neither is inherently superior, rarer, or more difficult to achieve. But wisdom must check, erode, and integrate the thorns of the ego, or it cannot prosper. The discipline, self-command, and lifelong dedication required to reach Rosa's level of integration must therefore be immense. Her path must demand constant inner examination and alignment, whose actions, words, even internal postures are governed by a deeply meditated system of ethics and understanding, one she is always refining. Hence she is a match for Cecil. And through that lens, Rosa is not primarily a figure of innocent maidenhood, nor is she a generic heroine or love interest. By the end of the journey, a more accurate comparison might actually be something like a Jedi Master. Rosa's ilk exists to some extent within the meta, not merely living their lives, but watching themselves live it, no longer operating as self-interested individuals, but as vessels for something vaster, viewing reality from a wider, even cosmic perspective. And to walk that path is to step out of the ordinary world, to become so transparent, so undistorted, as to allow the heavens to shine through. So, I'm going to sound even more like a hippie than usual here, but one way to look at the relationship between the white magic and her psychological posture is that when the universe deconstructs or disconnects, let's say splitting the matrix open directly and programming results, it's an instance of black magic, whereas when it constructs, reorienting itself toward wholeness, automatic integration, giving that matrix absolute authority to repair itself on its own terms, it's white magic. Rosa is fully aligned with the posture of construction, and therefore of wholeness. So, of course Rosa loves unconditionally, because that is a highly constructive posture. She knows that through her, and everyone else, the universe loves. Today it may bear the face of a disgraced Dark Knight, but its truest form, she knows, is something else entirely. So, of course she forgives, because through each of us the universe forgives. To open oneself to whole magic, that is, constructive magic, is to feel oneself so entirely inseparable from the web of existence, whose every strand vibrates in perpetuity. So, obviously Cecil can be forgiven, obviously Kain can be forgiven, obviously Golbez can be forgiven, because, well, look at this tapestry of circumstances and see how it leads ultimately unto fulfillment. Everyone else understood by the end, but Rosa understood it the entire time. If you can't see the web yet, here's a spirit-enhancing tea. Rosa's mindset requires a kind of radical surrender. Every choice, every act must align with the magic itself, and reflect the integrity of the mission, whose strength is not to be found in defiance or rebellion per se, but in absolute fidelity to what is optimally constructive. So, I want to say that characters like this are sort of meant to be bland, because they can't really perform their jobs while operating inside of ego space. Otherwise, the world is too noisy, too distracting, too trivial. But now I want to talk about the other side, the underside of that same very holy structure that is the magic of the cosmos. So let's get some intelligence tea. Rydia is also a character who is no longer quite inhabiting the world, only she fits more fully inside that magical princess archetype, explicitly similar to characters like Terra, Aerith, Elia, Garnet, and others who bridge the gaps between the worlds, not only magically but ontologically. And inhabiting this role often entails a painful transformation, a loss or suppression of human aspects, sometimes traumatically, to access forces otherwise unreachable. While both female leads in 4 display extraordinary degrees of spiritual attunement, Rydia's magic is spoken through a different register than Rosa's. Rosa's white magic speaks to the mercy of the upper earth and the order and stillness of the cosmos. Rydia's black magic speaks to the severity of the lower earth and the chaos and cycles of nature. I would say that a black mage is very often breaking the code, modding it. I think Rosa says, with her powerfully high wisdom and powerfully low intelligence, "No, silly, you're not dead. Nothing is real. You just have to believe." And the universe just snaps into that position where it was always whole and good. Rydia says instead, "There shouldn't be ice here, but I know the recipe for ice. You just have to fold the lattice upon itself like so, and then find the part of space-time where there's always ice here. Then program your guardian machine elves to take the path of least resistance towards that. There you go." Seriously, why did Cecil and Edge try to tell these demigods to get off the big whale? Rosa's spiritual path, similar perhaps to that of Cecil, Porum, or Yang, is marked by a conscious softening of the ego, chosen ordeal, long, slow calibration or daily meditation, and voluntary inward discipline. But Rydia's development resulted from forced sacrifice, from rupture, loss, and transfiguration, which, I think, is fitting for a character who is visually and archetypally representative of nature. The green child, like a seed, is thrown into the earth, is torn apart emotionally, which is really like a kind of death, and comes out greener and more resilient than ever. And as such, she embodies the very essence of nature. It is through hardship and ecological diversity that we evolve physically, and it is through encounters that push us beyond the familiar, and through sustained contact with the unknown that we transform ourselves metaphysically. That was Rydia's path. She was exposed to things which must necessarily transform a person in very peculiar ways. Both literally and figuratively, she lost her native soil, lost her anchorage, lost her frame of reality. And only then, once postured to drift past the edges of the map, and into an entirely alien state of being, were the deepest mysteries revealed. Because we simply can't see them through normal eyes. The Mist Tribe, either physiologically or culturally predisposed towards summon magic, might have read as a threat towards Golbez for this precise reason. The summoners seem to carry some innate capacity to bend the rules of reality through their contact with other worlds. I can't call it a coincidence that Rydia is the one who defeats Golbez's dragon while all of the other party members are incapacitated. Golbez himself is a master black mage, and appears to possess some kind of summon magic. And of course, Golbez, more than most characters, bends the rules of reality. So I get a sense that he didn't want the summoner tribe around, precisely for fear of encountering someone like Rydia, someone who has seen the darkness and no longer fears it, who recognizes deep and forbidden magic and knows how to dispel it. And someone else who can cast media without dying. Rydia was always my favorite character in 4. I think it's because, of all the cast, her story feels the most like something out of a fairy tale, or even a more ancient form of myth. Her journey into the underworld is reminiscent of Persephone's role in Greek mythology, for instance, as well as other European stories about humans, very often children, being brought into other realms, where time flows differently, and sometimes also re-emerging older, sometimes even near death, or conversely younger than what seems possible, or transfigured in some other way. Be it externally or internally, it's usually both, and often seeming just a little bit less human than before. Rydia's mastery of black magic and summon magic, and simultaneous loss of white magic following that descent, further reflects these archetypal underworld myths. But while her magic seems to have recalibrated itself to match the other world, she never loses her core identity. If anything, she is more herself than ever when she returns. Still, she's kind and sincere, even while she's casting death or bio or flare, or turning people into toads. She was always shown to be brave, and marked by a kind of inner strength, and we're shown fairly early on that she is remarkably mature for her age, to such a degree that it sometimes feels like she's taking care of Cecil as much or more than he is taking care of her, even though she calls him Big Brother in the original script. She returns not only with mastery over summon magic, but with a distinct maturity and clarity. By this point, she's long since forgiven Cecil, and long since moved on from loss. In fact, she even recognizes the necessity of her descent, and embraces having been conscripted into something much broader and more important than herself. Nonetheless, the cost of those years of unseen transformation is high. We see by the end that she's permanently displaced, has become something of a liminal creature, and can't fully belong in either world anymore. Rydia has become permanently attuned to the uncanny. There's a lot more to say about her, but I'll also need to zoom out away from Rydia herself to tell the whole story. There's an entire world of introspection to be found within the subterrane itself, and that's for later in this video. There are 3 prince figures in 4. Cecil, the fallen knight prince who must become worthy to overcome his despair. Edward, the grieving bard prince who must learn courage to overcome his despair. And Edge, the enraged warrior prince who refuses despair. What's interesting though is, of the 3, Edge's tragedy is arguably the most brutal. He doesn't just lose a kingdom politically, he watches his parents transformed into monsters and must kill them himself. At least on the surface, he isn't necessarily the deepest character, but I think he's facing a kind of mythic horror that few other characters could endure. His rage is no less mythic. It's almost like a primal fire, a peculiar shade of wrath which only comes online in the face of true evil. It's that part of the human soul which refuses to die, almost out of spite. That part which acts with impunity, with defiance, where, in the absence of hope, the soul is filled not simply with vengeance but with sheer force of will, whose purpose is to remove that evil or die trying. His energy is loud and theatrical, almost abrasive, but I think it's not just personality. It's also a kind of survival strategy. Edge is the character least burdened by hesitation because, for someone like him, stopping to think is deadly. He's got to keep moving, stay active, keep useful, find some occupation, do something with his hands at all times. If he was a musician, he'd definitely be a drummer. Edge, who remains hyper-masculine, outward and fiery, his trauma withal, finds himself hopelessly attracted to another traumatized character whose energy instead flows inward. For him, Rydia functions as a kind of hyper-feminine counterforce. She is a tamer of exotic beasts, a subtle and enigmatic underworld figure, and appropriately, the only character whose presence consistently tempers his boastfulness and aggression. In other words, his attraction to Rydia draws him inward. It makes him a little gentler, dissolves him a little. We're shown a similar-ish pattern with Cecil and Rosa, and even with Kain and Rosa, but with Edge the dynamic is taken to its apex. In Rydia's presence, the metaphysical outweighs the physical. The feminine tempers the masculine, and the spirit guides the body. But it's not really about Rydia. Next to Yang, Edge is probably the most physical party member. But where Yang is rooted, Edge carries a restless temperament and seems perpetually desirous for women, treasure, thrill, and novelty, much like the other treasure hunters in the series, such as Locke, Zidane, or Balthier. Like them, Edge thinks he needs external stimulation. But beneath that craving lies a soul-level hunger, not only for that aforementioned feminine counterbalance, but for what it connotes. Outer novelty, outer beauty, and outer pleasure are analogues for inner mystery, inner depth, and inner meaning. As many of us know, we're frequently drawn to others who seem to embody disintegrated or otherwise inaccessible aspects of ourselves. We like Dark Knight Cecil and sometimes even mod him back in, because he allows us to be imperfect and broken. He allows us to yearn for eventual redemption while acknowledging what is still maturing. He lets us be romantic about our own dark selves. And there's something really beautiful about a tragic fallen hero. So we love Kain. Some of you watching this even like Kefka or Sephiroth. Some of you might have even cosplayed as a villain. Some of you might think Genova did nothing wrong. But everyone likes Rydia. And most of us are a little bit Edge in that, whether consciously or otherwise, we're absolutely magnetized towards the mysteries of life. Someone who wants to grab every treasure, find every hidden passage, learn every ability, defeat every legendary monster, well, that person has magpie energy. That's every player. We're all magpies on some level. And the ultimate prize for the inner magpie is the inner treasure, that secret which can never fully be grasped, or that person who somehow literally seems to embody the very mysteries of the depths. The ninja, rather like the black mage, is something of a shadow dweller, or even a shadow master. Edge is competent, deft, and worldly, and despite his facade, must contain something rather subtle from having been reared within such a culture. But his grasping attitude suggests that he's looking for something more, and I think he finds it ultimately by joining with the party. His love for Rydia is real, but he loves her just as he loves what she represents. In a way, when he sees her crying upon that first meeting, she grants him a new reason not simply to survive, but to live. Almost as if, through her, the more tender emotions within himself are finally given a voice, or a reason to exist not only within the past, but also in the present. But then he blows his chance by telling her to get off the whale. After all that I've said about Cecil, Rosa, and just so many other sympathetic and spiritually enlightened characters, it's important to acknowledge that for many fans, the most memorable character in the game is Kain. I think this is because, more than just about anyone, he's so unapologetically human, and serves repeatedly as a reminder that sometimes, maybe a little too often, good people will do bad things. Kain serves as the ultimate foil for Cecil. They function almost as brothers, bringing friendship, rivalry, and tragedy into one another's lives in equal proportion. Of all the characters, Kain might seem the least sympathetic, at least on paper, and yet many of us can't help liking him, pitying him, even rooting for him at times. And I think it's because, regardless of our outward actions, at least within our imaginations, most of us have been Kain. We've all got something inside of us we'd prefer to hide. From others, maybe from ourselves. Something that taunts, demoralizes, or fills us with doubt, pity, or even disgust. Something which robs us daily of our peace, secretly causing us to wonder, what would I be willing to do, if only? How far would I be willing to go, if only? Or how might I act if I knew beyond any doubt that I could get away with it? And this might not be spurred on by any kind of cruel or unnatural desire. It might be the result of a profoundly positive intention, even a noble desire to do good, to rescue someone from an unhealthy relationship, or to remove a malignant person from power, or just to give someone downtrodden the upper hand for a change. And maybe that downtrodden person is you. And maybe you've seen someone in your life appearing to be blessed in every conceivable way, while you've seemingly had to claw your way through life. Or worse, perhaps that person is blessed, and you can only wonder why. Why them and not you? Why not someone's sick family member? Why not that homeless person you passed? And you might be tempted to think, well, clearly the rules are broken. It doesn't seem to matter how you behave, how hard you work, how noble your position. There's always going to be someone down on their luck for no reason. And there's always going to be someone, like Cecil, who's just blessed. I mean, look at this guy. He appears one day abandoned under a tree in Baron, and the first person to walk by happens to be the king of Baron, whom, without any questions asked, takes him in and raises him like a prince. An orphan from nobody knows where. Meanwhile, Kain is the heir of a celebrated noble dragoon. But Cecil has the king's attention. Both boys prove extraordinary warriors, but Cecil, not Kain, is made captain of the Red Wings. And Cecil is sent on the most important missions. Both are handsome, competent, well-to-do bachelors, but Rosa, possibly the only person Kain has ever loved, trails Cecil around like a puppy, even after he is stripped of his rank and title. She's so besotted with him that she follows him through dangerous terrain, nearly dying of fever in the process. And still, Cecil resists her, while Kain would have given anything to increase his time with Rosa, even for a moment. He wouldn't have turned her away. He certainly wouldn't tell her to get off the big whale. And that might just be the cherry on top. For Kain, no matter what Cecil does, no matter how many times he fails, everybody just adores him. Everyone follows his lead blindly. The guy behaves as though he's half angel, but of course he is. Literally. He's something divine. Something blessed from birth. And then he becomes king, because why not? I kind of feel like Kain had enough of a sense of unworthiness to contend with, even without these developments, you know? And I can't help thinking that even though the literal plot depicts Cecil as this impeccable, otherworldly vessel of gallantry, this must also be the way Cecil looks from Kain's perspective by way of contrast. And Rosa, too. They're both healers, pacifists, impossibly virtuous, almost flawless to onlookers. In the DS version, we see that all three of them were close childhood friends. But where destiny, honor, and worthiness are concerned, I can only imagine that Kain must feel miserably inadequate in their presence. And I think it would be difficult not to feel left behind. Obviously, Kain adds value to the party, but it's quite clear that he deems himself inferior, and even somewhat worthy of contempt.
Huh. And when he takes over your mind again? What then?
If that should happen, kill me without a second thought.
These are the kinds of thoughts which take root in the dark and grow into actions we never intended, leading us to places we were never meant to go. But this predilection for self-destruction exists not only within Kain, but in all humans, and is part of a recurring motif within the game. Where Cecil makes it fun to be good, I dare say Golbez makes it fun to be bad. Like most of the people watching this, I laughed at XDeath, I was morbidly fascinated with Kefka, I was outright disturbed by Sephiroth. Man, these villains just keep getting darker. But Golbez was just so cartoonishly evil that it was impossible not to like him. It's like he was too fabulous to hate, too grandiose even to be thought of as a narcissist like Kuja, or any other slightly subtler character in the series. The guy's all cape and pipe organ and shoulders. I don't even know if he knows he's evil, for the first half of the game anyway. Like, he might even think he's the good guy, but just listen to this dialogue for a moment.
Never hesitate to kill, Kain. Observe. This is how it's done. That is all the power you possess? A pity. Just be grateful I let you live after that blunder. You had best hurry, before she ends up dead.
This is definitely older brother language.
Ignorant dotard, have you any idea with whom you are dealing? A vain attempt at revenge. Impudent fool! Come forth, my creature of shadow.
The guy just has so much style. Everything from his theme song to his comically sadistic dialogue to his flaring black cloak screams antagonist. Golbez belongs in the coolest opera never composed, and it's a space opera to boot. But as with Cecil, I'm not going to say much more about Golbez just now because the deeper aspects of his character are interwoven into the broader movements. As a story, Golbez represents something tragic, deep, and universally relevant.
Why? Why was I so consumed by hate?
But as a guy, he's just so hilariously cruel and dramatic. And I like that. Sometimes we need a story with uncomplicated moral dynamics, where good is just good and bad is just bad, and forgiveness, therefore, actually means something.
There was evil in me, long before all this.
The role of Golbez within Kain's life represents something far more sinister than mere psychic manipulation. Regardless of Kain's genuine feelings of friendship toward the party, and despite significant feelings of remorse, once the intrusion took hold, we were shown that Kain's mind was never truly the same again. Now, if the after years is to be believed, it's not. Kain's corruption survives long after Golbez has redeemed himself and moved on. Whether we want that sequel to be canon or not, it depicts something very accurate about human nature. All of our traumas, misdeeds, anxieties, shameful memories, and harmful obsessions carry on with us, for as long as they remain unexamined. Sometimes even after significant revelation and healing has taken place, key portions of memory remain permanently unpleasant, or even dangerous to our well-being. Let's say, for instance, you're completely over an ex who broke your heart however many years ago. You've moved on with your life, possibly met someone else, you don't really think about that ex anymore. And yet, certain songs will just ruin your mood. Or you still can't watch a particular movie. Or maybe you quit smoking 5, 10, even 20 years ago. Cigarettes are no longer part of your routine, and the withdrawals are long over. Sometimes, however, when a certain mood takes you, you'll daydream about that perfect cigarette moment. Perhaps on a rainy day, maybe with breakfast, maybe with a certain person or a nostalgic TV show. Final Fantasy IV suggests that there's always a possibility of sliding back into old unhelpful patterns, and the extended material suggests that even after significant internal growth, it is always necessary to guard oneself from recursions of one's innermost vices, whatever forms these happen to take. The added character trials in the GBA port delved a little further into this idea, implying that even the most finished or spiritually advanced individuals are still existing within a state of perpetual inner growth, even after completing his transformation on Mount Ordeals. Here, Cecil is beset with temptations, testing the validity and longevity of his redemption. Rydia's trial examines her dependence upon hard-won eidolons, subtly posing the question, who is and was Rydia without them? Asking the player to consider that the very holy thing which relieved her of so much suffering is not the point of her existence at all. In Edward's challenge, we're shown in no uncertain terms that his grief over Damcian has not been faced. There is much inner work ahead of him. But the other side of this equation is even more salient within the game. In human beings, corruption is never entirely separate from goodness. Our protagonist and antagonist each portray within themselves a dual archetype, and when taken together, represent a richly symbolic dipole, where each expresses a union of the heavens and the earth, of Lunarians and humanity, of darkness and light, and of good and evil. Cecil is clearly presented as the moral brother, but it's important to understand that both brothers contain both of these aspects. In the beginning moments of the story, Cecil, no less than Golbez, is an instrument of war, and an unwitting pawn of Zemus. By the end of the game, Golbez, no less than Cecil, is committed to, if not entirely redeemed by, the side of peace. More interestingly, each of them is changed in his alignment by a powerful Lunarian. Feanor begins his tale as an innocent child and is twisted into Golbez by Zemus. Cecil begins his tale by debasing himself, only to be enlightened by Cluya. Both Zemus and Cluya exert their influence on the half-Lunarian brothers from on high, but in opposite directions, which suggests that either brother could have taken another path, had their respective circumstances differed. Symbolically, their mixed blood can also represent the conflicted natures and opposing tendencies within each of us. A similar story is fleshed out in Final Fantasy IX, where Zidane and Kuja, also two alien brothers once controlled by a gnarly space wizard, are shown to drift into opposite moral directions. In both cases, the elder brother is more circumstantially vulnerable to the influences of the space wizard and is conscripted into violence directly, whereas the younger is adopted into a comparatively humane system and integrates successfully into Gaian society. But Final Fantasy is about so much more than the questions of good and evil or nature and nurture. It's about a universe which must uphold superlative balance, and the roles we must inhabit in order to maintain that balance within ourselves. Final Fantasy is as much about embracing the darkness as it is about surrendering to the light. When Cecil at last returns to Mysidia, he's at his lowest point, betrayed by his king, his country, his closest friend, and even by himself. Everyone he once loved is gone from his side. Rydia, Yang, and Edward are presumed dead. Rosa has been taken by the enemy. His ship is destroyed, and all hope of reaching Baron with it. Then he washes up alone upon the shores of the one place he least wishes to see, the site of his worst memories and deepest shame. He returns to Mysidia, not as a powerful Dark Knight backed by airships, armies, or royal authority, but as a disgraced and broken man. Cecil has no justification to offer, no moral standing to assert. The Mysidians greet him with hostility, using magic to humiliate and assault him, turning him into a toad and a pig, cursing his name, spitting on him, even poisoning him. He doesn't resist. He accepts their scorn, perhaps believing he deserves it. He does not defend his ego. And functionally, that almost becomes a kind of ritual humiliation stage right before his transformation. Yet, the Elder of Mysidia, devoted to the study of legend and spirit, looks beyond material circumstance. The true Cecil, he understands, is neither the formidable captain of the Red Wings, nor the broken figure returned before him, but rather someone still in the process of becoming, and still capable of transformation. Real-world mythologies, religions, and classical literature more or less all teach us this same idea, that destiny is often ironic, sometimes comically so. More to the point, it is usually those who have known the darkness intimately who prove most capable of restoring the light. Mount Ordeals, one of the most mysterious and intriguing locations in the game, represents many things. Above all, it is a place where one goes to meet oneself, a site of symbolic death and transformation. It stands as the threshold between who Cecil has been and who he might yet become. Supposedly, no one has ever returned from Mount Ordeals alive. If Cecil succeeds, he will be the first. We soon discover that on Mount Ordeals, what was once strength becomes weakness, and weakness becomes strength. His guardians for this journey are two children, both fragile in body yet enormously powerful in spirit. They also travel with Tella, no less physically frail, though still retaining a potent force of will. Yet, hereabouts, Cecil's abilities, by contrast, are no longer helpful, for one reason. They possess spiritual powers, something which Cecil currently lacks. This is the first clue that Cecil is not coming here merely to rise in power, nor to shed his dark past, but to awaken and reactivate his spiritual self, a part of him that has long been subordinated to the body. Though this might have been unintentional on the part of the developers, I think Scarmiglian's challenge can represent everything Cecil must first overcome within himself. Being the dark aspect of the earth element, Scarmiglian is the embodiment of rot without renewal, death without rebirth, harvest without replenishment. It is the end result of over-reliance upon material power, and, functionally, a symbolic culmination of Cecil's path as a Dark Knight, which itself is defined by the wanton expenditure of life force. If the Earth Crystal is a source of abundance, provision, and vitality, something which can only be achieved via properly timed cycles, everything must transpire in its proper order, sometimes achieving ripeness more slowly than we might prefer, but always ultimately on time. We might perceive that the Fiend of Earth is a force which prevents life from returning to that cycle, as made literal through his army of undead and his own grotesque resurrection, each time more dead and rotten than before. In fact, I would even call this a mockery of that cycle, and the complete antithesis of Cecil's own subsequent transformation. Mount Ordeals is about shedding that which no longer serves, in favor of that which progresses the soul towards one's highest calling, a process which Cecil has already begun, starting from the earliest moments of the game, but which reaches its highest pinnacle here. Scarmiglian, meanwhile, is about clinging to a past self that no longer serves, even if it means putrefying and literally falling apart. This, too, is a theme which will recur in various forms throughout. Thankfully, Cecil has the right response to Scarmiglian's lesson. The Fiend shows us, in no uncertain terms, that if we just keep trying to do the same things over and over again, we're bound to fail. We can mow down zombies ad nauseum, sure, but they can't truly die. Instead, they'll just exist to gobble up time and energy forever. Metaphorically speaking, and I've said a lot about this already in my Zelda videos, I feel like undead creatures embody those parts of ourselves which refuse to move on. Their lingering regrets, ill-fated hopes, and other unhelpful situations within our lives, which parasitize our attention. While Scarmiglian's function was to make everything barren, I feel like his ultimate prize would have been Cecil himself. By the time of their first meeting, his soul, as a Dark Knight, to further the alchemical metaphor, has passed through the stages of calcination, dissolution, separation, and conjunction, and is, upon their meeting, attempting to pass through the dreaded putrefaction stage, breaking under the weight of loss, betrayal, and self-condemnation, and worn down by the realization that the way he has lived cannot lead him anywhere but death. In a less literal sense, by this point, Cecil is already dying. But if Scarmiglian wins, Cecil remains as a Dark Knight forever, misses his appointment with destiny, and does not complete that process. And more importantly, nor can the world complete it through him. At this point in the story, Golbez, rather Zeromus, rather evil itself, doesn't want to kill Cecil. It wants to prevent something holy from entering the earth through him. Zeromus despises, above all else, the future brought about by the crowning of Cecil's true self, which is one of peace, purification, restoration, and spiritual fulfillment, and which, as we're shown much later, is the only thing capable of defeating Zeromus. The fight is more difficult than anything faced up to this point, and the tools once relied upon only worsen the player's chances. The enemy literally feeds upon that Dark Knight energy, and this, I think, is almost a kind of rehearsal for the fight to come, which, alchemically, I believe resembles the distillation stage. I personally found it very interesting, especially as a child, that I was suddenly expected not to fight. The game kind of had me on autopilot by this point, just mashing the button to kill, and really, killing was the path of least resistance. It is in most RPGs. It's chillingly easy to kill in games without even thinking about it. When I played Undertale many years later, I was delighted that there was always an option to choose a peaceful path, always a way to get around killing. I had a similar feeling with Elder Scrolls with the illusion magic, just being able to make animals peaceful or hide yourself when you need to. And Final Fantasy Tactics, sometimes I enjoyed using the Order class in order to just recruit people instead of killing them. I feel like that's what Final Fantasy IV taught many of us. Sometimes the straightest path forward is to tank your mages, or even forgive an enemy. Sometimes it's to let go of something very powerful, even to become vulnerable for a little while. Cecil emerges from the shrine without equipment or armor, a moment strongly evocative of rebirth, like a newborn entering the world unclothed and exposed. This exposure itself becomes symbolic of the highest order of truth. Now he has nothing to conceal. Even his new character design, with his head uncovered and his face visible, further reflects the revelation of the true self. No longer merely a warrior, but an anointed champion, he is not and never was truly Cecil the Knight. He is and was only ever Cecil. The transformation is immediately evident in gameplay. Even at level 1, without equipment, he's quite formidable, and plows through those zombies like fire through lint. And by the time he descends the mountain, he's already stronger than he was during the ascent. The implication is clear. This is not a new identity being imposed upon him, but the unveiling of the one that was always there. Everything that came before that was merely a shadow of his true nature. Where the Dark Knight destroyed itself through wrong effort, painful lies, and effortful distortion, the Paladin is effortlessly strong. The story seems to enter into that final alchemical stage of coagulation following this. In other words, Cecil, much like a crystal, is still a thing forming. Everything leading up to that point created the necessary conditions of its forming. But, as with most of the legendary knights, on which he was partially based, his difficulties are far from over. It's a simple story. It's basically just Arthurian legend, which is another reason why I love it. I've often wondered, did everyone else literally just die on Mount Ordeals? Are they the zombies? Maybe. But I think we might also consider the fact that really no one ever comes back as themselves when they do survive. And if I may be so bold, perhaps Mount Ordeals is not a place one goes to die at all, but rather a place one goes to live. In a much less literal sense, maybe we all visit Mount Ordeals whenever life gives us an ultimatum, either to change or to rot. To commit to becoming our authentic selves fully, even occasionally to sacrifice everything we once understood about our realities, lest we submit to mental, spiritual, physical, or psychological ruin. The Mysidian elder knew that Cecil was the hero spoken of in legend, but he also knew, all too well, just how dangerous Cecil could become. That, so long as he submitted to a lesser and more brittle version of self, he would either be destroyed by Golbez, or far worse, and possibly more likely, would be recaptured and permanently made a tool of the darkness. Authenticity is one of the game's central themes, and always it is tied to the idea of the light. When Cecil becomes his true self, his light self, that act of authenticity is what ultimately prevents the darkness from overtaking him and, by extension, the world. This stands in sharp contrast to Kain's story arc. While the game doesn't spend much time inside his inner thoughts, it's not difficult to infer that his vulnerability to Zemus stems from his refusal to confront or acknowledge his truest feelings, and that this suppression leaves him open to manipulation. But the game draws a clear distinction between experiencing an emotion, even overflowing with it, versus truly losing oneself to it. Edge, for instance, unlocks, or perhaps remembers, his latent abilities in a moment of pure expression, discovering something that was within him all along. And we see a parallel in Rydia, when she summons Titan in a moment of unfiltered despair. Both scenes depict characters seemingly losing themselves to overwhelming emotion, superficially similar to Kain's loss of control, but with a crucial difference. Kain's collapse comes from suppression and denial, while Edge and Rydia achieve power through full emotional embrace. These moments are closer in nature to a trance or limit break from other entries in the series, a flash of intensity where rage or grief becomes not corrosive but catalytic, even redemptive. The game consistently suggests that goodness, light, and true power are rooted in authentic awareness of oneself, in seeing, in remembering, and in spending time with one's inner truth, that deep, unified impulse, which arises from that part of us which is inseparable from the whole. Conversely, the path into evil, darkness, and especially weakness, is shown to begin with self-forgetting, with the avoidance or denial of who one truly is. The extended materials make this relationship more explicit, particularly during Kain's personal trial, in which his crimes, albeit simulated, are repeatedly suppressed through amnesia, and only at the end is he allowed to confront them and decide what his truest actions might have been, and the player is invited to make that choice alongside him, determining which version of the Dragoon is the real Kain. In each of these releases, where self-acceptance allows for wholeness and the expansion of self, self-rejection gives way to self-erasure. In other words, one becomes less of themselves than before. This is the false will, the small will, which is driven by ego, fear, and lack, clinging, resisting, demanding results, and ultimately fracturing under its own strain. We see it with Cecil and his dark sword, with Tella's vengeance, with Kain's repeated betrayals, and especially with Golbez. In the DS remake, Theodore is literally renamed during the moment his will is contaminated. In that act, he becomes something lesser in every sense, no longer quite human, gaining an awesome, if not provisional, power, yet losing connection with his authentic personality, and therefore everything that might have saved him. But as I've implied, while the smaller will might stray into falsity and weakness for a time, the true will cannot ultimately act apart from the whole. The strongest example of this might be when, after the events of Fabul, Cecil decides he must confront Baron, and yet Leviathan waylays his party. This is at first framed as something of a catastrophe, but Cecil is thereby prevented from returning to his old, brittle ways of being, and especially from delivering himself into the hands of the enemy prematurely. The Divine intervenes, he is forced to finish transforming, forced to become something Golbez cannot destroy. I think this could be seen as part of Cecil's true will as much as it was a part of Leviathan's. Something in him cried out for change, and that something represents the part of Cecil which is not at all separate from the divine. That continuity, of course, spread its way into Rydia, Edward, and even Yang, who were all positioned precisely to aid him following that transformation. Rydia especially needed to be transformed, and I like to think that maybe something in their combined will or their combined destinies understood that everything in her life must lead toward her own moment of resurrection, returning to the world no sooner than she was strong enough and wise enough, and at the exact moment required to rescue Cecil from Golbez. In my view, the crystals in FF4 may be understood either as ecological and spiritual organs of the planet, reflecting its physical and metaphysical health, or, if one prefers, as a form of magical technology which, when properly arrayed, artificially sustains a delicate balance between the four elements.
Within Sakaguchi's worlds, of course, such distinctions needn't be resolved.
From a psychological perspective, the crystals, whether science or sorcery, function as a layered map of interdependent correspondencies, inward, outward, and beyond. When these registers remain in alignment, they do not merely preserve the world, but cultivate a state of optimal spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical coherence. Initially, Cecil and the player are led to believe there are only 4 crystals: the light crystals, which reside upon the surface of the earth, which belong to human civilizations and are regarded primarily as exoteric objects of abundance, power, and magical provision. But as the game progresses, we learn of the existence of deeper, darker counterparts to each of these elements, which belong to the inner earth and appear instead as esoteric objects of speculation and myth. Though they're referred to as the dark crystals, I think it's equally appropriate to think of these as the inner crystals, which might represent something of the world's more ancient, mystical, and dangerous interior, something left over from when the world was still forming, both physically and metaphysically. These crystals belong to the dwarven civilizations, who are likewise the subject of rumor and superstition. Later, we learn that there are at least 8 additional crystals on the moon. Their placement suggests some kind of energetic or psychic calibration, possibly tied to the sleeping Lunarians, the lunar core, or other unknown functions. While the game never fully explains their purpose, there is a clear sense that they serve a highly specialized and deliberate role. We also see some evidence of crystals serving individual purposes, such as the one integrated into the big whale, which seems to be a requisite of traveling to and from the moon. Then, of course, they can be repurposed in various ways, as seen within the Tower and Giant of Babel. I've already covered the crystals as a general series phenomenon in a much older video, so I won't delve too much further into their other myriad functions, ranging from mundane items casually bought and sold to manifestations of cosmic will.
But I will say that in FF4 they seem to primarily serve a structural purpose.
And part of that purpose seems to result not in the light simply eliminating darkness, but rather in the marriage or unification of equally divine opposites. During the final battle, we discover the existence of a singular gem referred to simply as the crystal. As far as I can recall, this object is neither foreshadowed nor explained, yet it is nonetheless imbued with a strange and undeniable significance. I can only conjecture, but what this crystal appears to represent, at least to me, is the culmination, or perhaps the teleology, of all the other crystals, as though their balance, collectively, made possible the existence of this final stone, the only object capable of breaking the spell over Zeromus and revealing his true form. Everything the party has done in order to protect the crystals has led to this moment, first in the vast yet still comprehensible light world, then within the eerie and arcane dark world, then, ultimately, leading into a place which seems a strange combination of both, and remains impenetrably mysterious, even in its final moments. By the time they get into the crystal core of the lunar subterrane, each of the party members has completed their respective heroic destinies, and though it's not literal within the game's text, I think the final crystal, wielded by Cecil, represents the culmination of that destiny. Crucially, the final crystal can only respond to one who is discovered after a descent into darkness, evil and disintegration, the light, goodness, and interconnectedness inherent not only of himself, but the entire universe. When the player finally descends to the underworld, there's a feeling that the war has been going on quietly beneath the surface for longer than anyone above the ground might have realized. The Red Wings might be a new addition, but herein we discover that the Tower of Babel is fully armed, fully occupied, and fully operational, and by all appearances has been that way for quite some time. It seems plausible then that long before Zemus set about conquering the Outer Earth, his forces had already colonized the Inner Earth. Even early in the game, we're warned that monsters are becoming more aggressive. And while they do appear in overworld regions, the strongest and most ominous are usually found deep within caves, catacombs, and other subterranean places, perhaps already influenced by Zemus's expanding reach from below. This is part of a larger motif. On the moon, the Lunarians sealed their most dangerous weapons beneath the surface, hoping to keep them from falling into the wrong hands. Even Zemus himself was sentenced to an indefinite slumber underground. And, as with the horrors contained within the Tower of Babel, the lunar subterrane is not sealed perfectly. In both cases, what lies sleeping beneath begins to influence the world above, and brings about mass destruction no sooner than the crystals are drawn out of alignment. I've talked quite a bit in my other videos about the symbolic implications of underworld realms in video games, fantasy, and mythology. Often they tend to represent the substrata of our minds and bodies, our collective unconsciousness, vestiges of earlier evolutionary forms, repressed ideas, fantasies, and attitudes, or even hidden wells of deeper truth or enlightenment, and every other kind of wonder and terror imaginable. But let's talk about the creatures inhabiting those substrata in FF4. I'll start with humanity's underground analog, the dwarves, who comprise a humble yet time-tested structure. They are rooted, honest, and surprisingly hospitable toward the party, given the circumstances of their arrival. And although tough as nails, the dwarves also seem curiously wholesome as compared with both the humans and the Lunarians, whom I'll be discussing shortly. Unlike their surface counterparts, the dwarves aren't particularly romantic about their existence. The humans are melodramatic, tragic, practically Shakespearean, and the Lunarians are, well, they're hopelessly theatrical. Everything is deadly serious with the Lunarians, and always discussed on a cosmic scale, which, of course, it has to be given the stakes. But the dwarves, meanwhile, will slosh their cups of gut-scorching ale and give you a heartfelt, soul-deep rally-ho, even in the midst of a crisis. When the party fails to protect the crystals, more than once, I might add, King Jaya never reprimands, nor even despairs of it, and nor does he trust Cecil any less. In fact, whilst the party members are busily lamenting losses and betrayals, apologizing or even curdling into self-rebuke, the dwarves are communicating simply, okay, this is the current situation, here are the options, how can we help? When we spend too much of our time focusing on external things, even potentially positive things like relationships or societal standing, we can lose touch with what's happening in the here and now. And I think this is why the Dwarven warriors, though earthbound, resist the selfsame aerial threats responsible for decimating the surface. The dwarves, dwelling within the earth's molten belly, wielding stone weapons and armor described as too heavy for human use, challenge us to locate those parts of ourselves that are undaunted by the heat of the moment. They excel in it. They are forged in it. And I think this can symbolize a kind of subterranean or inner strength within ourselves, whose rootedness, metaphorically speaking, might likewise resist aerial attacks by way of inner resources, such as personal sovereignty, courage, and bodily intuition. But I'd be remiss not to mention that the dwarves do not inhabit the deepest layer of the underworld, geologically or psychologically, just as the overworld is riddled with caves and waterways, stranger, deadlier, and more exotic as they go down. Even past the molten hollows, the journey inward continues, both spatially and thematically. The farthest visitable portions of the underworld are the Sylvan Cave and the Eidolon Cave in Feanor, which are inhabited by the likes of fairies, gods, titans, and other eidolons, and seem almost to blur the distinctions between the physical and the metaphysical. Functionally, they're realms of pure myth, fantastical even by the standards of a game already overflowing with mystery and folklore, where plants can grow without the sun, and time behaves so strangely that Rydia was able to live out years of her life under the care of Asura and Leviathan. Just like the dwarven domains, these places are neither safe nor accessible to those who have not spent adequate time mastering underworld travel, which is itself synonymous with mastery over magic. To a beginner, the monsters are prohibitively difficult, the magical forces are relentless, and the terrain is hostile. The game tells us outright that those who test themselves against such realms, willingly or not, are better able to resist the thrall of evil. The words of Asura and Leviathan, then later Bahamut, who also resides within another kind of inner world, make this abundantly clear. No one is going to survive the subtler forces without, until first honing the subtler forces within. In general, all the nations with direct or indirect access to, or even mere rumor of, the underworld's powers are shown either resisting Golbez ferociously, or else harboring some latent potential to thwart him. Whether they are humble enough to remain inconspicuous, sufficiently versed in the forbidden arts to evade total defeat, entangled with the Feanor, or so incorruptibly aligned with the higher good as to challenge evil directly upon the spiritual battlefield. Each possesses some quality that resists absolute subjugation. Note that his first known targets were missed in Mysidia, neither being particularly warlike or threatening, yet each maintaining access to deeper spiritual powers adjacent to the underworld. In the case of Mist, they almost certainly had some knowledge of the underworld, given their close partnership with the Eidolons. But it's also not implausible that the Mysidians have long understood the layered and interconnected nature of the three worlds, just as they've understood the deeper secrets of magic. Perhaps, given time, they might have even been able to prevent the Giant of Babel from rising. I get a somewhat similar sense about Eblan, whose proximity to the underworld via Babel is notable, and, like the dwarves, are tempered by circumstance and made to thrive within shadows. As a culture of ninja warriors, they can also represent a different kind of underground resistance. Theirs is a strength forged in secrecy, which is owed to an intimate familiarity with the darkness. Given that they know perhaps a bit too much about what lies beneath the surface, both geographically and psychologically, perhaps they were even the first targets of Golbez. After all, Golbez deemed Eblan enough of a threat that he sent his strongest fiend Rubicante after them. Each of the Eidolons behaves as a messenger of the magic's truest design. They serve as threshold guardians, both without and within, where every encounter is meaningful, and every battle requires some form of unusual, often creative strategy. Whether the characters triumph, disgrace themselves utterly, or just barely survive the encounter, demonstrates, at least to some degree, the progress of their spiritual ripeness. But the elemental archfiends, I think, demand no less spiritual readiness from the party, and in their way also function as representatives of the aforementioned inner worlds. They are likewise positioned at key thresholds, and hail from a different kind of underworld, making repeated references to a literal hell, which is, for our purposes, kind of like the most negative aspect of the other world. Or to put it another way, they're the cruelest and most evil form the magic takes, other than Zeromus, and perhaps some of the other things sealed within the lunar subterrane. Scarmiglian even refers to itself as the ferryman to the other side, which indicates that, as with all magical things, he's not so much a villain as a circumstance produced via human action, experience, and relationship. All four of them appear during story beats centered around death, sacrifice, acute suffering, and painful revelation, and each of them requires the party to plan and think carefully. I've already discussed Scarmiglian at length as a specter of stagnation and decay, among many other things. For the most part, we fear Scarmiglian and his undead servants, insofar as we fear death. But I also want to touch briefly upon another, somewhat darker aspect of his symbolic existence. Entities like Scarmiglian can also represent a desire or even an irresistible pull toward death, especially for characters like Cecil, Tella, or Golbez. But with various degrees of seriousness, I think most of us have wished for death at least once within our lives. Perhaps one wishes to join a departed loved one on the other side. Perhaps one is in so much pain every day that life has become a misery. Or perhaps, like Cecil, one carries a burden so vast and so heavy that one can't imagine any other means of release. My dad was a man like Cecil. He didn't have a father figure growing up, and he joined the Navy very young. This is a true story. He left his small town in Saskatchewan right after high school and moved to Australia in pursuit of his absent mother, and somewhere along the way got conscripted into the Vietnam War. The Navy gave him a sense of purpose for a while. He had a new family there, but unfortunately, he came back with a stone in his heart, which caused him misery for the rest of his life. We all carry these stones. But for many, the stones produced by war cannot be integrated in life. The call towards death and the call toward rebirth have a similar sound. And while the distant promise of rebirth produces hope, death's call can be equally, almost unbearably seductive. It's not even just about life and death either. It's that accursed desire to give up, the desire to stop halfway up the mountain. It's that abyssal fatigue which races every day against our determination in the hope of capturing our time. And from this perspective, the zombies of the mind aren't really afraid or even unwilling to die, but tragically and ironically unable to rest. The next fiend, Cagnazzo, the abyssal messenger of water, is described, at least in the original Japanese script, as being lonely. In some versions, he is also associated strongly with fear, and his visual appearance is perhaps the most disturbing of the four. While Scarmiglian's design evokes a kind of primal revulsion and a simultaneous fear and fascination with one's own mortality, Cagnazzo threatens us with a more intimate kind of terror, the terror of one's life gone wrong, the loss of loved ones, and the destruction of what was once familiar. The water element itself is frequently associated with emotion, so perhaps we can think of him as being a representative of personal suffering, grief, and despair, a thing which is arguably even more threatening than death. Cagnazzo's encounter is synonymous both with the loss of Cecil's surrogate father figure and with the reappearance of Cluya, the true father, whose gift of light prepares Cecil for his return into Baron. Water is strongly associated with this entire story beat. First we have Leviathan, another paternal figure of sorts, redirecting the flow of Cecil's course toward Mysidia, the formal site of Cecil's despair where the water crystal was housed. Note that both Leviathan and Cagnazzo are messengers of flow, carrying Cecil toward the place most strongly associated with his personal destiny. Cecil first arrives in Mysidia aboard a vessel meant for war, believing himself to be acting according to Baron's will. Later, he attempts something similar against Baron itself, only for Leviathan to destroy his vessel outright, making it clear that he was never wholly in command of his own path. As with emotion, water represents interconnectedness, all currents resolving into one body, all agents in all events gradually moving toward equilibrium. Cecil's 2 visits to Mysidia are therefore not isolated incidents, but linked movements within the same unfolding destiny. Cagnazzo, I think, represents a false understanding of one's life path, the illusion of control over forces already moving beneath the surface. The thing that first set Cecil upon his journey was not truly the King of Baron, but a monster wearing his shape, creating violent disturbances within the waters of the world's magic and destiny. Yet the same currents that brought ruin and separation also carried Cecil toward healing, purification, and eventual reunification, suggesting that even destructive turbulence may become part of a larger movement toward restoration. To a lesser degree, this is also felt within the Devil's Road, also known as Serpent Road, a magical current under the sea connecting Mysidia with Baron, which is described as being exhausting to travelers. In other words, that relationship is harsh but necessary. Then the water theme is carried forward via the ancient waterway, and the theme of necessary grief and suffering is furthered when the twins are petrified. As a paladin, Cecil can better resist magical attacks, such as Cagnazzo's tsunami, but perhaps Cludia's gift also enabled him to better withstand the emotional devastation Cagnazzo represents. After all, while Cecil has lost the false kingdom of Baron, he has also gained something truer by far, which will culminate in Baron's golden age. Barbariccia, the fiend of air, represents entanglement, temptation, and mental diffusion, symbolized most obviously through her hair, but also through her unusually seductive and human appearance. Of all the archfiends, she is the most associated with desire and distraction, the force which scatters the mind, draws attention outward, and leads human beings astray. Her ability to petrify the party recalls Medusa and similar feminine symbols of destructive fixation or enchantment. In this case, she becomes the specter looming behind Rosa's abduction, Kain's betrayal, and the broader theme of desire used as a mechanism of control. Golbez abducts Rosa the moment he realizes that both Cecil and Kain desire her, then forces Kain to guard her within Zot, while refusing him the assignment he prefers, deliberately weaponizing inferiority, proximity, and temptation against him, much as Scarmiglian was used in an attempt to trap Cecil within his own darkness. During his time in Zot, Kain is said to have become familiar with Barbariccia, which implies that her presence might have played a critical role in furthering his corruption. Yet this may also have somewhat inoculated him conversely against his own personal weaknesses, and furthered his own integrative process. Just as Cecil is shown the limits of power and the stagnant nature of the dark sword through Mount Ordeals, Kain is forced to look at his own wretchedness in the Tower of Zot, culminating in a scene of confession, reconciliation, and tragic revelation, immediately preceding Barbariccia's entrance. The air element itself is diffuse, scattered, and associated with thought, flexibility, quickness, and elevated perspective. At its best, this diffusion permits adaptability, detachment, and freedom from fixation. At its worst, it becomes disembodiment, distraction, and an inability to harden when moral clarity is required. Those deeply familiar with temptation and diversion may learn to move fluidly with circumstance, adapting quickly to changing currents. Yet without sufficient grounding, they remain vulnerable to psychological whiplash and loss of direction. Significantly, the air crystal resides in Fabul, where monks train high among the clouds, combining air with stone, strict discipline, bodily hardening, and freedom from distraction serving as a counterweight to the instability of the mind. Much like real-world practitioners of meditation or martial arts, they seek transcendence through intimate familiarity with their own consciousness. Physically speaking, Kain is himself a master of the air element, yet ironically remains the character most vulnerable to its whims. His first visible betrayal occurs in Fabul, where his lack of mastery over mind is fully exposed, and Barbariccia is ultimately defeated only when Kain rejects the temptations governing him. In cutting through the whirlwind of distraction, he briefly becomes the strongest rather than weakest link, acting decisively to save Rosa and stand against the very force to which he himself had long been captive. The final fiend, Rubicante, is strongly entangled with Edge, who holds a personal vendetta against him, but he's also entangled with a larger motif about vengeance, pride, and emotional isolation. Rubicante is an interesting one. Unlike the others, he enjoys the, let's say, aesthetic of nobility. Sure, he'll destroy your castle and everyone in it, but, he'll pretend to kind of care about you afterward. He's most famous for sparing Edge's life and even healing the party before fighting against them. Some perceive him as being merciful or honorable. Personally, I see him as a guy who likes the idea of being noble and lordly, and perceives himself as just that threatening that he thinks he ought to throw you a bone. Edge is very triggered by this behavior. It's exactly the style of condescension to make someone like him lose control. And for that reason, I feel that Rubicante is kind of like Edge's personal tormentor, just as Barbariccia might be considered Kain's tormentor. Edge wanted to fight Rubicante one-on-one, but at the end of the day, Rubicante's full strength is meant for advanced warriors, not just physically but also psychologically. If we're continuing to be less literal about all of this, Rubicante sees potential within Edge as someone who is clearly on the point of spiritual integration. But a few more things must be encountered first. He needs to see Rydia cry and to accept the help of others, recognizing that the fight is much bigger than himself, and he needs to encounter his trauma more directly via the transformation and death of his parents. Only then is his purpose rendered pure. Otherwise, he's too willing to burn himself up for all the wrong reasons, literally fighting fire with fire, about as useless as Cecil's dark sword was against Skarmiclian. And he's not realizing that if he throws himself away needlessly, he's depriving people like Rydia, or even his surviving countrymen, the help they so desperately require in their gravest hour. Edge's integration demands delay, thus Rubicante, as with all magical things, an agent of integration, wants to fight the completed Edge. Whatever portion of reality he comes from, I think he, like Edge, prefers a bit of a challenge. He probably likes the idea of seeing the brightest and most worthy stars descending spectacularly from the heavens in a blaze of tragic glory, which is precisely the death Edge was trying to give himself, just too soon. Rubicante, like Edge, is a bit of a romantic and a consummate professional, and he's precisely the kind of threshold guardian capable of corrupting the path in its last moments. Rather than despair or lust or panic, he brings out those little impatient sparks of pride within us all, that restless, lordly thing that thinks it's already complete, and like a fire resists containment until it loses control of itself, often unexpectedly, explosively, and hilariously. The entire Archfiend's subplot teaches us that there are layered truths hidden within ourselves, influencing and influenced by social dynamics, personal grievances, and unprocessed emotion. The Fiends represent everything which must be overcome before any individual could be rendered fit for power. Things which pose a danger not only physically but spiritually. The Fiends are each placed within close proximity to the strongest warriors in the game, all of whom Golbez believes he must either manipulate or destroy, but instead, every time the party encounters an abyssal general, further truths are teased out, and almost everyone within the game is brought a little closer to redemption and healing. Understanding the layered psychological subtext of 4's underworld and all those daemons which dwell within, whether or not it was intended by the developers, requires a broader look at all three realms and how they interrelate. I'm just going to go ahead and directly quote another more recent video of mine. The concept of the special realm present in most forms of fantasy fiction very often blurs the ideas of traveling into dreams, heavens and hells, alternate timelines, universes and realities, or even the realms of gods. The concept of a descent into the depths, symbolically anyway, is not entirely dissimilar from the notion of ascent unto the heavens, or of shifting laterally between extraordinary modes. And this, I hope, further instills one of the recurring ideas I've been trying to impart within this video, that exceptional knowledge, power, and numinous experience tends to reveal itself more readily when we break outside of our usual frame. Where the dwarven civilizations are suggested to have grown closely alongside the humans, and even to have interbred with some of their communities, the Lunarians elected to place their bodies into prolonged stasis, and to wait for the people of Earth to reach certain societal benchmarks before making contact, desiring that the two races should coexist, but not before humanity was ready for the inevitable side effects of contact with an advanced alien culture.
It's a simple story. It's basically just Star Trek, which is another reason why I love it.
But if we take that less literally, the Lunarians could also symbolize a kind of evolutionary inevitability, yet one that can't be achieved without the societal equivalent of a firmware upgrade, which, to extend the analogy further, is represented by Kluya bringing the crystals and other forms of magical infrastructure into the Earth. In the real world, our bodies, the hardware, became highly specialized for intelligence. This got us far, but we're still struggling to bring ourselves toward the next evolutionary stage, safely, ethically, and without conflict. Once we thought only of ourselves and our small villages. Now we're thinking globally, even thinking about the whole universe. But somehow those tendencies, those inner and outer crystals, so to speak, are failing to correspond with each other. In FF4, the evolutionary update is implied to be a form of high-level physiological, psychological, and spiritual integration, one which better prepares the way for seemingly impossible realities, such as faith-based healing and elemental magic, miraculous devices, technologies, and interdimensional craft, and, of course, ultimately, contact with alien life. I'd personally describe the Lunarian update as a form of extended cognition, or a willingness to extend one's understanding, one's belief, and one's sphere of influences and connections just a little further than the vanilla biology requires. It can also represent a kind of access to pre-existing untapped potential within our own minds. There are, after all, nigh infinite places within each of us that have never been traversed. It's not currently possible to know the limits of the human mind, even without an externally imposed update. But taken to its furthest extreme, this idea points toward possibilities almost unimaginable. The latent potential of the human mind, multiplied by increasingly sophisticated technologies, could accelerate both invention and personal transformation at an exponential rate. Cybernetics, biometrics, and bodily augmentation already gesture toward a future in which the boundary between human and machine becomes progressively less distinct. A prospect capable of profound healing, empowerment, and discovery, but also one uniquely vulnerable to an unprecedented degree of exploitation, coercion, and abuse. I think the magic in Final Fantasy IV can be seen in the same light. We're given one example of what this process was ultimately meant to achieve when Kluya gives his light to Cecil. After receiving this miraculous, though tragically unexplained gift from his father, Cecil gains the ability to cast healing magic and becomes a stronger, more capable version of himself. This gift of light is synonymous with the teleology of the crystals I discussed earlier. In other words, the most advanced form of integration available in the game's cosmology, as seen in the final battle, though I'll get back to that later. The manner in which this gift is given also matters. Cluya's act is described as painful and costly. This is very likely related to his grief over Golbez, but it also feels as though he's using something of his own essence to rapidly install some form of metaphysical infrastructure that would perhaps ordinarily be developed much more gradually. Story-wise, I think this implied a kind of urgency or time pressure that perhaps under ideal circumstances, the Lunarians intended humanity to reach this level of integration organically, and therefore with greater stability, whereas Cluya's intervention suggests a kind of emergency acceleration of that process. Maybe even something Cecil only survives because he is half Lunarian, or again, to be less literal, because he is already much further along in his own alchemical integrative process. But whether or not Cecil or anybody else was ready for it, why was it necessary to wait? Well, as is the case with cybernetics and biometrics today, under less controlled circumstances, the same kind of integrative process could easily, maybe would, inevitably lead to division, mass panic, or even war. This is already somewhat implied during the Mount Ordeals sequence. The idea that our own unintegrated darkness, if paired with Lunarian-level abilities, could become catastrophically destructive. More broadly, the Lunarian species itself can be read as slumberous and yet powerful components of consciousness seeking embodiment and integration. Cluya's establishment of magical infrastructure, gifting of crystals, and teaching of magic, all at a pace appropriate for humanity, models a form of empowerment rooted in wisdom, timing, and planetary health. The crystals, the aforementioned nodes of integration, were carefully positioned to stabilize the world rather than fracture it. Meanwhile, how humanity responds to that infrastructure becomes a true test of readiness. Sadly, the ease with which people fall under Zemus's mind control signals a lack of command over the very mental and spiritual faculties the Lunarians represent. Likewise, the lust for the crystals exhibited in various earthbound entities suggests a deep yearning for contact, power, and transcendence, paired with a persistent unreadiness to receive them without distortion. But I just want to take this moment to point out how much cooler it would have been if instead of the After Years we got a prequel starring Cluya. If I'm going to continue reading the Lunarians less literally, not only as aspirational beings who represent evolution upward, but as symbolic facets of the psyche, I should point out that their presence also gestures downward, and that the difficulty of constructing worldviews that endure conflict and of allowing different aspects of cognition to coexist harmoniously cuts both ways. Which is to say, the Lunarians' own desire to mingle with humanity and their need for a physical world in which to live can just as easily symbolize our need to ground ourselves, to reconnect with instinct, embodiment, nature, animal vitality, or even a more childlike mode of being. Final Fantasy IV is as much about the Lunarians making ready for Earth consciousness as it is about the humans making ready for lunar consciousness. This theme is explored even more explicitly in FF9, where the Terran souls literally require Gaia-compatible bodies, Gaia itself functioning as a symbol of embodiment that can survive on the planet and properly house Terran souls. But the Terrans, despite their superior knowledge and ability, were never able to complete that transition. Every attempt failed, and all but 3 souls remained asleep, never to be reborn. Well, there's more to it than that, but that ought to be its own video. There's a meta rule at work beneath all of this. Unintegrated cognition cannot act directly, it must wait in layers. The so-called other worlds of Final Fantasy are therefore not elsewhere at all. They are strata of consciousness that cannot yet be lived. Once this is seen, everything else becomes almost self-evident. Why these beings sleep, why they are buried, why premature awakening is dangerous, why embodiment is required, and why failure is not confined to humanity alone. Alien worlds read as cognitively distant, abstract, transpersonal, outer to the ego, while their subterranean dormant state marks them as unconscious, latent and unintegrated, inner to the psyche. That paradox is precisely the point. These figures feel numinous because they occupy both positions at once, outside the self, yet also within it. From there, the pattern resolves into octaves. Dwarves, Lunarians, and Terrans mirror distinct strata of the unconscious, each with its own gifts, dangers, and required pace of integration. Downward growth draws toward instinct, body, time, vulnerability, trauma, even childhood. Upward growth reaches toward abstraction, cosmic meaning, meta-awareness, and extended cognition. Crystals recur across all of these cultures because they function as interfaces between the layers, as points of translation rather than destinations. In this light, these other worlds are not places to be reached, but rather deferred states of consciousness, awaiting the conditions under which they can finally be held. Where the Terrans fail because they attempt ascent without descent, abstraction severed from embodiment, Zemus fails because he despises the downward pull entirely. Through Zemus, the sole Lunarian unwilling to wait, who seeks to erase the humans entirely, the game makes its case against rushed integration unmistakably clear. Zemus can be understood not just as a hostile colonizer, but also as a dangerous side effect of cognitive expansion when it is unmoored from embodied ethical concerns, such as suffering, limitation, or relationship. A disembodied consciousness, fittingly, is the form he inhabits throughout most of the game, but even more striking is that, once killed and thus fully severed from material existence, his evil is magnified into Zeromus, who, among many other ideas, is kind of like radical detachment taken to its utmost extreme. And everywhere we've seen Zemus's influence among the humans, we've had a taste of what that detachment actually means, as seen within characters like Dr. Luge or King Baron. The forms of corruption that arrive directly through this otherworldly channel are irreversibly destructive and profoundly contemptuous of life. Extending the analogy, Zemus is like installing the Lunarian expansion pack as a full system upgrade, but without the migration layers that would allow the older structures to remain intelligible. He personifies a kind of developmental imbalance, an advanced conceptual framework that relentlessly pushes upward and outward while refusing to nurture its roots. And in that respect, he is both regressive and hyper-progressive. His refusal to allow humanity to mature naturally, revealing a profound contempt for what is unfinished, at once spells a rejection of innocence and maturation. But his unwillingness to allow the inhabitants of the blue planet to eventually accelerate their evolution also demonstrates a kind of contemptuous pride, and I think somewhere beneath that peculiar hatred lies a need to feel sovereign, and beneath that, perhaps a failure to accept what has already happened to the Lunarian culture long before the game begins. Zemus has lost his own planet. He doesn't have roots anymore. He sure as heck doesn't want to have to adhere to the customs of someone else's planet and try to grow out of their soil. For someone like him, that might even feel like a kind of death. That kind of relationship demands, in many respects, a loss of self, and that can be kind of traumatic, especially when it's not chosen. This trajectory culminates in a confrontation not with a monster, but with a concept. A pattern also repeated in 9 with Necron, another metaphysical byproduct of a failed integration process. And in both games, the final battle emphasizes connection in lieu of brute force. fallen party members are revived again and again via prayer, love, and meaning, and it is the acceptance of that meaning which enables them to stand, to hope, and to prevail. I think Final Fantasy in general has been trying to dose us with relational integration as a kind of remedy against that persistent refusal of connectedness, with which we all occasionally suffer. Even though we spend more than half the game battling against demons, hockey players, and innocent cats, relational integration between friends, enemies, lovers, opposites, whatever, is repeatedly implied to be the most powerful force in existence. At the end of the game, we witness Golbez using the most powerful spells he knows in an attempt to destroy Zemus, perhaps out of vengeance, perhaps suicidally, or perhaps in a final act of atonement. But in a sudden twist, we learn that this might have definitely been exactly what Zemus intended. Zemus wanted to be killed. His destruction then becomes almost a kind of perverse summoning ritual, one born from hatred and violence, and from it Zeromus is born. Zeromus at first seems invulnerable. Every attack fails and he annihilates the party effortlessly. I personally think this is because Zeromus, now an entirely bodiless and metaphysical being, can only be reached or defended against via metaphysical means. Accordingly, no sooner than all the world's nations unite, not in force but in sentiment, does the tide begin to turn. At the pinnacle of the prayer tower, all the lives touched by Cecil's deeds are gathered, elder, child, man, woman, human, dwarf. One by one, these absent companions appear in spirit form, reviving and strengthening the party, in some great act of never-before-seen magic, which may or may not be literal. Even Tella, who is dead, alike to Anna before him, returns in spirit, suggesting that whatever is now taking place somewhat transcends earthly physics. As with all of the games, we're getting kind of meta towards the end. Perhaps Zeromus represents an idea so large and so implacable that it can only be properly encountered by way of its total opposite, something equally large and equally powerful. Note that when Golbez relinquishes that aforementioned final crystal to Cecil, explaining that only someone of the light can wield it, and that Golbez, burdened by darkness, cannot, Cecil's use of the crystal doesn't actually hurt or destroy Zeromus. Instead, this light, whatever that means, reveals his true form, and only in that simple act of revelation is Zeromus at last rendered vulnerable. Why? Well, from a psychological perspective, anything which we might consider evil, such as malice or violent intention, thrives best within half-truths and false frames. It thrives anywhere there's a hurt deep enough to deaden one's awareness. Anywhere there's an incomplete, distorted, or fragmented picture of the world, of oneself, or of somebody else, sufficient to invert our understanding of what is internal versus external to our authentic experience. Whatever it is truly in FF4, that final act of magic seems to be its total opposite, the gathering of all the frames. Only then, in seeing with that superlative resolution, and allowing each point of reference to exist exactly as itself, can we make contact with the real Zeromus, with the real force of evil, a thing irrespective, unblended finally from the sorrows and beauties of our personal tragedies.
Seen clearly, however, Zeromus is utterly without appeal.
What we behold finally is beyond terrifying. Evil's true form is not only intimidating but repulsive, representing the complete absence of life, beauty, hope, and meaning. It represents the endpoint not only of Zemus's corruption but of all unchecked hatred, malice, and deception within the universe. It becomes clear that we were never really fighting a villain in the first place. This is something else. One of these guys. Zeromus, as we discover, is the truth underlying every atrocity we've ever witnessed. This is what we've been fighting all along, both in the world and within ourselves. A potential persisting at all times within all things, like tinder awaiting a spark. His parting words reinforce all of this. He's declaring it outright. He's not merely a villain, but a principle. One that's born and reborn every single time we think, feel, or act from that place. The game suggests that only in the presence of a fully realized consciousness, one who has gotten to know those parts within himself, above, below, and beyond, and crucially, without denial, distortion, or rejection, can such a force be revealed and therefore resisted. Cecil, having completed this transformation, has become compatible with the crystal's teleological purpose. He does not flinch from the darkness because he already knows its shape. He no longer deceives himself because he cannot. And in that stripping of illusion, evil cannot reign. And he realizes that just as such disintegrative forces exist and live on without a body, so too must integrative forces endure. No matter what happens, the light can be reborn in this same way. Fluya endures through Cecil and Golbez. King Baron endures through Odin. Rydia's mom endures through the Mist Dragon. Anna endures through Edward. Everything endures through connection, old and new, mortal and immortal, alive or dead. As long as connection remains, hope is not lost. And this, I think, is the posture which does not destroy but neutralizes Zeromus. Cecil's integrative process began within the first moments of the game, when he found himself unwilling to ignore the injustice of the king's orders, only too late. But that process did not conclude with the destruction of Zeromus. I think everything he went through, every trial, every riddle, was leading not to this moment, but this one.
Farewell, my brother.
When Cecil rose to the occasion, accepted his mistakes, and willingly entered into that metaphysical space once supplied by his father, he was shown a most unflattering, darkened mirror image of himself. But somewhere within that image could be found not only Cecil, but Cluya's other son, another lost soul, led tragically astray.
You are my brother.
But were it me, the one Zemus chose to control, our roles might just as well have been reversed.
Golbez, in many ways, was not simply a brother, but a representation of Cecil's alternative self. He revealed the endpoint of ambition, violence and unconscious obedience. The only difference ultimately was that Cecil began his process of self-realization a few years younger. He felt, just in time, the universal truth, that there will always be good and evil within each of us.
There will always be evil in men's hearts. We, all of us, bear a touch of darkness, just as surely as we bear light. Much as with the twin sets of crystals. And the darkened underworld that rests beneath your planet's brighter surface. But as long as there is darkness, so will there always be light.
It's a simple story, it's basically just Star Wars, which is another reason why I love it. Zeromus, as a concept, was not really defeated in battle. It wasn't about getting his hit points down to 0. All that really accomplished was to buy the universe a bit more time. The game's philosophy has little to do with winning against one's foes, and everything to do with maintaining the conditions in which evil cannot prosper. This is something Sakaguchi has been trying to tell us for decades. He was all but outright implying that every act of love, reconciliation, and forgiveness slows the heat death of the universe just a little. Or even that if peace could only be brought to the right person at the right time, then maybe countless lives could be spared, and so much suffering avoided. Cecil found his peace in time, to be transformed from weapon into savior. Golbez was late, but he found it in the end, not when he defeated Zemus in battle, but upon the acceptance and forgiveness of his younger brother. Likely the last thing in the world he had ever expected to receive. From that point onward, perhaps there was some chance of him becoming more than what he was. Some part of him might have remembered what it felt like to be Theodore. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed it.